Is a new Jayhawk on his way to Lawrence. Bill Self spoke to the media, had some interesting comments about another addition possibly, as well as some members of the current team that might be taken off in the offseason.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're talking a little KU basketball. Bill Self spoke with the media, talked about making another addition possibly. He gave some high praise for some key role players and some other notes from Bill Self that we'll get into on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, let's start right here. Bill Self spoke to the media, and one of the, prevailing things that he said coming away from this was talking about possibly making another addition. Obviously, Kansas is sitting on 12 scholarship players at this point in time after the loss of Noah Shelby. Are they going to make another edition? Could they make two more editions? Well, I don't know that that's likely, but could they make one more, right? And here's what Bill Self said. And here's a tweet from Henry Greenstein at the press conference earlier. Said, Bill Self said he's open to adding another player. We're in the process of definitely looking into another. In my opinion, needs to be a guy that can at least run a team, play the point, maybe have some experience, shoot the ball. He later said it would be an insurance policy player. So a couple things to note there. One, the insurance policy player thing. That kind of tells you that, anybody we add at this point in time, probably not somebody that we're going to be expecting to be in the rotation. Probably would be somebody that we would add that would be, hey, this guy didn't pan out, or more realistically, this guy's in foul trouble, or this guy's injured, and we have to thrust him into a bigger role, but he's going to help us in practice. He's going to give us more of that insurance policy, right? The other part that was interesting, though, was him talking about, somebody that can run a team. That kind of tells you that it probably would be somebody that is more of a veteran type of player, somebody that can be a little bit older, somebody that people can count on. Maybe it means you have a high basketball IQ. I don't know. Also, then you get to the point, he says, play the point. Well, now we're directing into, okay, what position are they looking to add? Okay, point guard would kind of be the answer there, right? I think that kind of implies that they wouldn't be looking at adding a big. I would be a fan of, if you added another player, adding a big man, giving you more big depth, because they really still only have 3 bigs on the roster. And I think Kansas is going to be mostly playing with basically 4 perimeter players around one of the bigs, so that can be okay. But I think it'd be nice to have a 4th big over having another guard. You do have a lot of guards still on the roster, but you can understand adding even more, and I guess you just steer into playing that way even more over the course of things. But that to me kind of implies that if they do make an addition, it is going to be a guard, not another big man. Also the thing, maybe have some experience, shoot the ball. Obviously you want 3-point shooting, and that makes sense for that specific role after you lost Noah Shelby, who is somebody who, I guess has a little experience. He would have been a 4th-year college player, and definitely the idea of him was to be a good shooter, right? So this continues us on the offseason prowl, just to begin with. It keeps the dimly lit flame alive that, okay, was Kansas ever going to add? Now this refuels the fire, rekindles it a little bit more to be oh, see, they are possibly interested in adding someone. We can continue on with our offseason because it hasn't been long enough to begin with. We have to keep it going with the rumors and who could Kansas be going after. But a lot of everything the Bill Self kind of said there, it sounds a lot like a player that we just had a deep dive on. I think it was last Friday. Thank you to everydayers who already caught that. And if you haven't already, go back and watch it. Nginyu Ngala, the point guard from Canada, who, is a good 3-point shooter, is a very quick, pretty athletic, shorter guard, but is an experienced player who's in his mid-20s and has some experience just at a lower level, a different level. That sounds like it's pointing in a lot of ways to him. And what I do find interesting there is, I don't know if people remember this much, but there was a quote given by Bill Self. This was the offseason that they landed Hunter Dickinson, talking about, we need a big man that's going to get us, I forget the direct quote, but it's we need a big man that can get us 20 and 10. and it felt very pointed at Hunter Dickinson. Turns out you ended up landing Hunter Dickinson, and that's who you got. And I'm sure there's more examples of Bill Self doing this sort of thing where I don't know if it's like, is it speaking it into existence in a certain standpoint? Maybe. Or is it like he has an idea that this could possibly happen and he's kind of hinting at it, this is kind of what we need because he knows that's what they're about to land and it makes for a fun story. I don't know what would be, but a lot of those things, again, if we pull up the quote and it says, needs to be a guy that can at least run a team. Ngala did that in Canada, play the point. He is a point guard, maybe have some experience. He played 4 years or I guess 5 seasons with the COVID year in Canada. Shoot the ball. He's known for being a good 3-point shooter and, being an insurance policy, being a veteran type of player who would come in and you already have 6 guards. Like that sounds a lot like Ngala to me. I think the other thing that we could probably read from this quote specifically is that probably implies that there would only be one more edition if they do make one more edition, right? Again, you go back to the beginning of this quote and it talks about he's open to adding another player. We're in the process of definitely looking into another, right? That doesn't definitively say we're going to add another player. So there is no guarantee they do add another player, but it sounds like that range of adding someone is 0 to 1, not 0 to 2. I guess at this point, based on the quote, I would be surprised they added 2 more players. I think it's either you're playing with 12 scholarship guys, which would be the current makeup of the roster, or you're playing with 13 scholarship guys. And again, going back to the idea that I would probably be a bigger fan of if you did add another player, it being a big, more so than a guard, just because the numbers game. I guess if we're at a point where you're saying, okay, if we do add another player, if you do add a 13th scholarship player, it is going to be a guard. I don't think it's as big of a deal at that point to say if you end up adding him or not, because again, you have much more. You look automatically, Darryn Peterson, Elmarko Jackson, Melvin Council, Jayden Dawson. That's 4 guards right away, who 3 of them are probably going to be starting. And all 4 of them, I feel confident, are going to be, part of the rotation and playing, 20-ish plus minutes per game, right? That's 4 guys already. And then if you start factoring in, do you count Kohl Rosario as a guard or a wing? I'd probably count him more as a guard. Like that's another guy who could possibly play for you. I don't know if Jamari McDowell would be somebody I'd project in the rotation, but that is another guard that you kind of have there in that same role. So it's not super important that Kansas does make this addition if they end up doing that. But I do think some of that quote, some of those specific points were very pointed for Bill Self into a specific type of player, and also kind of gives you a little context that, okay, it's probably one more edition, if anything. And if it is going to be somebody who, I'm not going to necessarily launch into my expected rotation for Kansas coming into the year. Now, Bill Self also gave some interesting quotes talking about Kohl Rosario, Paul Mbia, and many others. We'll get to those next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day, and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on the fun items, food, drinks, merchandise, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Seat views right in the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you're going to be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Download the app. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget, you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, so Bill Self talked much more than a possible another addition for KU. One of the other things he mentioned, and again, this is a tweet from Henry Greenstein, emphasizing how big the team is this year. The quote was, "We did some testing the other day, and I think Peterson, with a 6'8" or 6'9" wingspan, is one of the shortest we have." And again, Henry is of the LJ World and KUSports.com. That's fun that Peterson with a 6'8" or 6'9" wingspan is one of the shortest we have. Now, I don't know, is that true? Because wouldn't Elmarco's be shorter? Does Elmarco have like 6'10" wingspan? That'd be nuts. What about Melvin Council? And does Dawson have a bigger wingspan? I don't know. I don't know, maybe he wasn't referring to like the smaller guards. Maybe he was referring to like, okay, Trey White's bigger and Flory's bigger and Paul Embiid's bigger and Bryson Tiller has bigger arms and stuff. And I don't know, maybe Kohl Rosario's is bigger. Maybe he has a long wingspan or something. But like, I'm struggling to get, he's one of the shorter ones. That kind of implies he'd be on the bottom half. I don't know, maybe he is. But either way, it's an exciting thing. It's something we've talked about in the offseason, that this Kansas team has a lot of length, has a lot of wingspan to it. And that is certainly the case that's going to make KU, a better defensive team, and is going to make them more of a problem for other teams. And he also he said, I think we've corrected what we were deficient in the past in regards to KU switching more and guarding differently. And that's something we, are going to talk about this offseason and have talked about this offseason, the idea that KU is going to be more of a flexible defense. Kansas finished, as a solid defense the last 2 years, even with some of their deficiencies. Finished 20th in adjusted defensive efficiency 2 years ago. They finished 11th last year. So like, defense overall, yeah, there were some warts that they had, but it wasn't a problem for KU. The offense was the bigger problem for KU. However, there were still some warts for the defense where they were kind of matchup dependent. If Kansas played a team like BYU, who could really space the floor, Kansas had problems with it, right? If you had a team who could really take advantage of like ball screens with good guard play, that caused KU some problems. The teams who had two bigs, like that didn't cause KU as many problems, right? It was kind of matchup dependent. The beauty of this year's team with all that length and wingspan kind of 1 through 5 throughout the roster is that you can be more switchable, and you can adjust better to those types of teams that can kind of pace and space you or have that good guard play. So I think that's going to really help both schematically with what Bill Self wants to do, and just in general with making them a more solid defense matchup to matchup. Like maybe they'll finish around where they were this past year of 11th, but I think it'll just be a more consistent 11th, as opposed to like some nights Kansas looks like a top 5 defense if they're playing, Houston, for instance, who plays two bigs, or Duke, but then other nights Kansas doesn't look like a top 25 defense when they're playing like BYU, for instance, right? I don't think it would be as inconsistent as this past year's team. The next quote that Bill Self gave that we want to talk about, this tweet from Matt Tate, at MC Tate. Bill Self notes that the top 3 shooters on this team are probably Darryn Peterson, Kohl Rosario, and Jayden Dawson. He says there are others too. Okay, obviously a lot of guys are going to shoot threes, so makes sense there. But Peterson, Rosario, and Jayden Dawson, I think that kind of backs up what we thought. Like, I think when we ranked our KU basketball shooters, we had Noah Shelby in the top 4, and then those were our other top 4. Shelby's obviously gone, so those become the easy top 3. As I've talked about before, I think Rosario is going to be more of a streak shooter this year as a freshman. Peterson, I have no idea. Dawson, it makes sense. I expect him to be one of the best shooters on the team. But that exact quote was backed up by Trey White, who also spoke to the media, and he listed Darryn Peterson, Dawson, Rosario, and then White actually, I think, listed himself, which love the confidence. So that's a good thing that you're confident there, as long as you have a rein it in. Don't be launching 8 threes a game if you're a 33% 3-point shooter. But like, I think that kind of tells you that that's consistently the answer. Now, you could glass half full, glass half empty. The glass half empty approach is that if it's consistently those 3 guys, is that because nobody else is emerging? And so it's like, it has to be those 3 guys. Everybody else sucks at threes. I don't think that's the situation. I think the glass half full is that those guys have been consistently shooting the ball well and look like good shooters at this point for KU. And I think the one that it matters most for, because I expected Rosario to, look like a good shooter for KU, right? Again, it might be a little streaky here and there, but I expected him to be a good shooter for KU. I expect Dawson to come in and be a good shooter. That is why Kansas gave him a scholarship to be kind of a 3-and-D shooting guard, right? With Darryn Peterson, that's the one where it is kind of that wild card. He shot well from 3 at his previous level. It's not like that was an issue for him. When you're as good of a player as he is, like, you're going to still be good at things, but you never know with freshmen. We talked about this before. Guys come in, and sometimes freshmen, especially, like, shoot, Tyrese Maxey, I remember coming in. I should go back and look at this and get the exact number, because I don't want to like guess and get it wrong. I'm pretty sure Tyrese Maxey, his 1 year at Kentucky, who's like, Tyrese Maxey is now like, what, NBA all-star level player? Yeah, okay, he shot 29% from 3 in his 1 year at Kentucky. And he was a good scorer, 14 points per game. So point being, players get better shooting the ball. Players get more consistent shooting the ball. That can be an area where if like Darryn Peterson came in, he could average 18 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists per game on a steal and a block per game, shooting 45% from the field, but he's at 31% from three. And it's like, yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world, but he wasn't a great three-point shooter. The fact that you have these reports from Trey White, the fact that you have this report from Bill Self, the fact that you keep hearing these stories about him getting late practice with Jock Vaughn, that probably implies he's getting a lot of shots up, probably makes me raise the expectation for what I think Darryn Peterson can shoot this year. Like, could he be a 38% three-point shooter? That would be pretty bonkers and would certainly help KU from the shooting perspective. I do want to also get into some of the role players, so to speak, for KU, because I think there were some interesting conversations and comments from Bill Self talking about Elmarko Jackson, talking about Kohl Rosario, Paul Mbia. Let's get to all those next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One of the biggest areas of strife, I think, that in marriage, like typically when they show those stats where it's like, oh, this is the leading cause of divorce and stuff, like finance actually becomes like a big issue in a lot of marriages, relationships, or unknowns, kind of the stresses it can create. Well, with Monarch, the communication and staying on the same page with your partner, it's a big help in that area, right? If you have it all in one place. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with Monarch Money. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, don't forget you make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Okay, so Bill Self had some comments about Elmarko Jackson and some of the possible role players for KU. Let's start with Elmarko. This, again, tweet from Matt Tate, said that Elmarko, athletically, he's where he was before he got hurt. Timing-wise, he's still got a ways to go. So a couple different directions to take this one. Let's start with the athletically, he's where he was before he got hurt. That is great news, especially because my big question for Elmarko was, okay, does having, the year off, this basically being his third year around the program, second year of play, does it allow the game to slow down a little bit for him? Because you look at his first year, the issue for Elmarko in the first year wasn't that he wasn't athletic enough. He was more than athletic enough. It was that the game was a little bit too fast for him, and he was probably thrust into a bigger role than he should have been because KU didn't have as much depth to where, you're kind of that situation of like throwing the child in the, that's probably not a good analogy in the pool and letting them figure it out. That, probably not good. But anyway, with Elmarko, my question was, okay, is that stuff going to be figured out? But now the athleticism going to take a step down because he just is coming off a season-ending injury. The fact that you hear that, great news that the athleticism could possibly be here. Now, I probably should have earlier in this episode given the disclaimer that, like, sometimes in the offseason, Bill Self does, over exaggerate on certain things. Like I go back to Zach Clements being the most improved player that was given at the banquet like a couple of years ago. So take these with a grain of salt, but still that is good news that if the athleticism is back, I have no reason to believe he can't be, a breakout player for KU this season. When he's saying timing wise, he's still got a ways to go. There's a couple ways to interpret that. Is that saying that, going back to what happened his first year when the game was moving too fast? I don't think it is. Is it just saying that, he's a little rusty right now, right? He hasn't played as much team basketball, organized basketball as some of these guys of late because he just missed a year of being able to do that, of not being medically cleared to do that. And I think that just makes sense. It's just kind of shaking the rust off. And he's just still trying to, get his timing down, passing to other guys and playing in a 5-on-5 setting. I have no worry that, if that's the case in July, like if that's the problem still in October, then we can talk about it. I'm not really worried about that right now. I'm just more encouraged that the athleticism is back for Elmarko. Okay, this next one was talking about, he said, the team was incomplete until the signings of Paul Mbia and Kohl Rosario. Again, this is from Matt Tate. Needed another big and shooting, and he said they were able to do about as well as they could to do with those two that late in the game, added that both have looked good so far. So that's great news because with Mbia, you're counting on him to probably be your backup center. And with Rosario, I think the hope is that he becomes your, consistently in the rotation, that he is your shooter off the bench and that he can show a lot of potential and break out in a big way for you as a freshman. Now, he added to this, talking about Kohl Rosario. This is certainly one that could get headlines. He said, this is again from Henry Greenstein, Kohl is a Christian Braun that shoots it better, but he's not as big and not as powerful yet. Because Christian, like 6'6", 6'7", somewhere in that range, had good power, obviously throws down a lot of dunks and stuff. Rosario maybe a little shorter, more of like Braun, more of somebody who could play the 3 or 4, and he's doing that in the NBA. Rosario more of a 2 or 3, so it's a little different. But the fact that he's a better shooter, I mean, Christian Braun came in right away and shot like 40% from 3. It was on lower volume. It was more set shots. And I think you want to get a little more variety with Rosario, but like I think that's the difference. I think Rosario can get his shots off in more ways. I'm not expecting him to shoot that high of a percentage because it was more selective in year 1 for Christian Braun, but that speaks very highly. And if you remember, now Kohl Rosario actually a higher rated recruit than Christian Braun. If you remember though that first offseason that Christian Braun came in, he was, I forget if he was inside the top 100. I thought he was just outside the top 100. Either way, like a near top 100 recruit, not somebody who comes in with McDonald's All-American pedigree. And it's like, is this guy going to take a couple of years to develop? What's going to happen? And then you kept hearing stories in the offseason. Bill Self loves this kid. He's getting all the hustle balls. He's like rebounding really well for a wing. He's just like making winning plays. He doesn't need the ball in his hands. I could see Kohl Rosario fitting that in a lot of ways. And so if you remember, Christian Braun was a key bench wing. He was playing, 18, 20 minutes per game off the bench for that team that was the best team in the country. Then he becomes a starter in year 2. Then he becomes a all Big 12 player and eventually first round draft pick after year 3. I'm not going to say Rosario is going to follow that path because that's a really high bar, but it would not shock me if he follows that type of path of being somebody who is in the rotation this year, ends up playing even more minutes than maybe right now I'm projecting him for 10 to 12 minutes per game. If you told me he's going to end up playing 18 minutes per game, wouldn't shock me. And then by year 2, he ends up being an all Big 12 player or something, or as a starter for KU, wouldn't shock me for Kohl Rosario. But very high praise there from Bill Self. He also mentioned Samiz Calderon has been a surprise, and he's been pleased with him. That just becomes interesting because Calderon and Rosario are in direct competition for minutes. Who's going to be the 8th man? So that's where that becomes very interesting. And then the last one was just kind of talking about Paul Mbia and kind of talking about how they didn't really recruit him the first time around. He goes to NC State, and how it really worked out for Kansas and Bill Self, and how he's been pleased as well with what Mbia has been doing. He said, we've been really pleased and impressed with him so far. Again, you can put the disclaimer on all these and say, okay, there's certain reasons he would give some quotes. Some quotes are going to be to try to encourage a guy. Some quotes are going to be to guys who maybe are further on the bench that aren't going to get a huge role on this year's team. But if he says something publicly about them, maybe it makes their camp feel like, okay, we're making progress here, that it increases the chance that that player would stay after the following season. I don't know if that would be something, or just keeping everybody happy before the season starts. Maybe that's part of it, right? Keeping everybody engaged so they stay as competitive as possible, to make sure everything is as competitive as possible. There's underlying reasons that you could point to that say this stuff, but certainly seemed like a lot of good news from Bill Self on where the team is at coming into another season for KU basketball. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going to have on tomorrow's episode talking a little about the top strengths and weaknesses for the upcoming KU basketball team. And, what are some areas that are still to be determined? We'll also, later in the week, get some more KU basketball content. We're going to have Phil Steele of Phil Steele Magazine to preview KU football. That'll be on next week's shows. So make sure you're subscribed right here, anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time for another edition of Locked On Jayhawks.